Luffy's devil fruit powers are pretty much the single most important thing in all of One Piece. For the longest time, we thought that Luffy is someone so strong-willed and fearless that he somehow overcomes the seemingly weak powers of his rubber devil fruit again and again, and for most of the story, grinding his way past enemies with way stronger devil fruit powers than himself. That is until his epic battle with Kaido, where we find out that it has actually been the other way around all along. In reality, Luffy has been the person with possibly the strongest devil fruit in the story that allows him to turn anything he imagines into reality. However, Shanks gave it a fake name and so tricked Luffy into using it in its weakest form for almost the entire story, which in a way makes it even more impressive that he has managed to come this far while holding back like 99% of his true power. But that leaves one really interesting question on the table that every real One Piece fan has at least asked themselves once in their life before. What would have happened if Luffy had eaten another extremely overpowered devil fruit as a kid? Now, of course, there are many ultra powerful devil fruits in the story to choose from, like Enel's lightning fruit, Kaido's dragon fruit, or Whitebeard's earthquake fruit. And if you want to see me cover those fruits in another video soon, well, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. But for today, to make things a little bit easier, I've decided on 5 devil fruits that I would have just loved to see Luffy use in the actual story. And these are the devil fruits of the 5 marine admirals: Aokiji's ice fruit, Kizaru's light fruit, Akainu's magma fruit, Fujitora's gravity fruit, and Green Bull's forest fruit. And so if Luffy had eaten each of these 5 ridiculously overpowered devil fruits, how would the course of Luffy's journey have changed? And how would Luffy have used all of these fruits compared to the admirals? We begin in Luffy's childhood, where Luffy accidentally eats the devil fruit that Shanks and his crew have just stolen from a marine ship. And we do know that Shanks got his hands on Luffy's devil fruit very much on purpose because it is very important. And so to give Luffy a different devil fruit, let's just assume that Shanks has not only 1 but 2 devil fruits with him. And instead of the purple rubber fruit, hungry kid Luffy eats this second one. Now, as you might know, all the Admiral's devil fruit powers share one similarity. They belong to a category called logia devil fruits, which turn their user's entire body into a force of nature. The only exception here is Fujitora's gravity fruit, because we actually don't know if it is also a logia fruit like the others or just a regular ability that has no effect on his body whatsoever. And for the sake of this video, we will just go with a regular fruit just to make things a little bit more interesting. And so depending on each fruit, when Luffy eats the devil fruit by accident and Shanks grabs him, instead of his arm stretching, Luffy's body reacts differently here. For the ice fruit, he would probably freeze Shanks' arm. For the light fruit, Shanks' hand just passes through Luffy. For the magma fruit, Shanks burns himself trying to touch Luffy. For the gravity fruit, Shanks is suddenly smashed into the ground, and for the forest fruit, Luffy just sprouts a little flower on his head and his feet grow roots into the wooden floor of the pub. Well, Shanks would give that fruit to Luffy's future brother Ace, the son of Goldie Roger, the former pirate king, who was also Shanks' former captain. In case you wonder why, I actually made a whole video on what would happen if Luffy was never born, where I explain in a lot of detail why Shanks was originally looking for Ace to give him his devil fruit and how Luffy accidentally eating it changed his and Roger's entire plans. I strongly recommend you check that one out later, but yeah. For our scenario right here, Luffy has now eaten a powerful logia devil fruit and Ace is the one to eat the Nika fruit. Now, one big question that we need to ask ourselves is, of course, would Shanks still sacrifice his arm for Luffy and give him his straw hat if Luffy didn't become the chosen one? I think there's a real argument to be made here that Shanks would rather try to inspire Ace to become Pirate King. On the other hand, Shanks really took a liking to Luffy even before he even ate that devil fruit, and I think he would still come to save Luffy, especially after he was willing to fight the mountain bandits to defend the red hair pirate's honor. So yes, I do think Shanks would still save Luffy and inspire him to become a great pirate just because he likes Luffy. However, I think that in this specific scenario, I think that Shanks would decide to keep his arm instead. Ace would most likely not want his father's straw hat because because he blamed Roger for all his suffering in life. In case you didn't know, Luffy's head used to belong to Roger before he gave it to Shanks, and so I think it's fair to assume that even in this case, Luffy would still end up getting his iconic straw hats. After that, Luffy's childhood stays pretty much the same, only that he now learns to use his Logia fruit powers instead of rubber powers, who now belong to his brother Ace. So let's now get to the juicy bit and jump 10 years into the future, where Luffy leaves his home island to start his own crew. With 4 out of the 5 fruits, he would probably just leave in the same small boat and end up in the barrel on Kobe's ship again. If Luffy ate Aokiji's ice fruit, however, I think he would be powerful enough after 10 years of training to freeze the ocean under his feet and simply start walking across the ocean, similar to how Aokiji uses his ability to bike across the water. But even in that case, I think he would probably still get lost and somehow end up running into Kobe. Now, one thing that we gotta address is that with Luffy having such overpowered abilities, the journey through the East Blue is even easier than it was before. Luffy defeats Alvida, Morgan, Buggy, Kuro, Don Krieg, and Arlong with ease, who have absolutely no chance against any out of his 5 abilities. Because we can assume that none of these enemies have actually mastered any form of Haki, they wouldn't even be able to touch Luffy. And even if we're talking about Luffy having the gravity powers, he would simply crush any of them under a pile of rubble before they could even come close to him. In fact, there's only one real obstacle for this version of Luffy before entering the Grand Line, and that is Smoker. Now, in case you forgot, Smoker is Luffy's marine rival throughout the first half of the story, and the first Logia fruit user we meet in general. And since Luffy won't master Haki until the second half of the story, he can only win against another Logia fruit user if his element is the natural weakness of his opponent's elements. However, not only that, but on top of this, Smoker also carries this very unique weapon, because the tip of it has been coated in a material called Sea Prism Stone that nullifies any Devil Fruit ability. That means that even the untouchable bodies of a Logia fruit user would suddenly become solid again. And so just like in the main storyline, Luffy would not be able to beat Smoker. Woods has no effect on Smoke whatsoever. Ice and Magma can maybe create some sort of wind to mess with Smoker a little bit, but I don't think that it would be enough to actually stop or even defeat him. And since Smoke is also extremely light, Luffy would need to have mastered his gravity powers to an incredibly high level so that he could affect Smoker here at all, which I honestly think would be kind of unlikely. Instead, Dragon once again has to step in and save his son from the marine. The only exception here, I think, would be Kizaru's light fruit, because it is so fast that Luffy would be able to run away from Smoker and maybe even blind him to get away. And as you'll see, as we enter the first half of the Grand Line, this will be a sort of pattern until we finally start to face characters who know Haki and until Luffy learns Haki himself. Enemies that seem to have no Haki abilities whatsoever, such as Wapol or Moria, have no chance against Luffy because they literally still can't touch him. Does Rob Lucci and the rest of ZP9 have Haki before the time skip? Well, on the one hand, it would be strange if they did not, given that they are special forces, but at the same time, there is no hint whatsoever that any of them is using any form of Haki during their battle with the Straw Hats on Enies Lobby. And so I really think that only Gravity Luffy would have any trouble at all with Lucci, although even then, Luffy would probably be still powerful enough to take him down and probably collapse all of Enies Lobby with him. So instead, the real challenges during this part of the journey until we come to the war at Marineford are of course the other Logia users in the story. Starting off with the one and only Sir Crocodile, the main antagonist of the Alabasta saga. Now, as you probably remember, Crocodile has eaten the dryness or sand Logia devil fruit, and Luffy was only able to beat him by coating himself in water and his own blood, since humidity is dryness's natural weakness. So how would Logia Luffy without any Haki do against Crocodile? Well, it really comes down to the matchups. Luffy having Aokiji's ice powers, for instance, should absolutely be able to win. Ice is quite solid and you can simply dry it out, like a puddle of water, for instance. And at the same time, given the high temperatures in the desert country of Alabasta, Luffy would be slightly melting on the surface all the time, imitating the same effect he used to defeat Crocodile in the actual story. With Green Bull's devil fruit, on the other hand, Luffy would have been defeated pretty much in an instant. I mean, Luffy's forest powers would be absolutely useless in the desert, and even worse against Crocodile, who would be able to simply dry up any of Luffy's attacks and Luffy himself. Similarly, the light fruit would also be pretty much ineffective against Crocodile, who on top of all this most likely also has some form of haki at this point in the story as well. And so in both of these cases, Luffy would have had to resort to the very same water trick as in the main storyline. If Luffy had gravity powers, I do think that he would have a quite decent chance to hurt Crocodile simply by crushing him into the ground, sand particles or not. And the almighty magma fruit would simply melt Crocodile's sand and overwhelm it like this. We know that because Crocodile managed to block one of Akaino's attacks during Marineford, but was trying to get away from the Admiral as fast as possible to avoid taking any more damage. Now, Enel, on the other hand, would be a completely different story. The lightning fruit is arguably one of the 5 strongest devil fruits in the entire story and one of the most powerful logia fruits out there. Now, in the main storyline, Luffy was able to beat Enel because of his rubber features that made him immune to electricity. But how would Luffy have done against Enel with a different devil fruit? The light fruit, for instance, at first glance seems quite similar to Enel's powers, and you might think that light and electricity wouldn't really affect each other much. But then again, light is just the byproduct of high energy and heat, so you could think of Light Luffy as a living light bulb that could absorb all of Enel's lightning and then turn it into more energy himself. Similarly, Forest Luffy would not be able to touch Enel at all. In return, we have seen that Enel is more than capable of destroying plants and trees with his crazy lightning bolts. And if we're being honest, so far Green Bull's forest fruit seems to be the worst option for Luffy. As for light and magma, these could arguably go either way depending how these powers actually work in One Piece. For Aokiji's ice powers, if Enel's powers are stronger than Luffy's, then the heat from his electricity would start melting Luffy, and the more water there is on Luffy's body surface, the more electricity it conducts, and the quicker Luffy gets defeated by it. On the other hand, if Luffy's ice powers are as crazy as Aokiji's, cold can actually slow down electrons, and that would basically reduce Enel's electricity powers to nothing. Similarly, having Akaino's magma powers, Luffy could turn the area around him into hard, rocky ground which doesn't conduct any electricity. However, magma itself, since it's a hot liquid technically, actually conducts electricity extremely well. So who would win? Well, I think in both of these cases it really comes down to who is more experienced with their devil fruit power. Similar to how both Aokiji and Akainu would have been able to overpower each other. Extreme cold can make magma useless, while extreme hot can melt ice. It's really a question of endurance and power. After this, of course, there are also the 2 encounters with Aokiji on Long Ring Island and Kizaru on Sabaody. Now, we could have gone through the entire physics here again, but the truth is, clearly both of them would have been way more skilled with their logia fruits than Luffy at this point, and on top of that, they all have extremely powerful haki, so I do not think that Luffy and the Straw Hats would have had any real chance against either of them here. Then we have Luffy's encounter with Blackbeard in Impel Down. Now, Blackbeard is really interesting because his darkness fruit is supposedly the strongest logia fruit out there. However, on the other hand, it doesn't behave like a logia fruit at all. Blackbeard's darkness has strong properties of both gravity and absorption. He can pull things towards and into him. And on top of that, when he touches someone physically, Blackbeard is able to nullify all of their devil fruit powers. So really, we'll have to wait and see if this fruit truly is a logia fruit or whether it might not be something else similar to Luffy's real fruit. Now, it would seem like Luffy having Kizaru's light powers would be perfect against darkness. However, we know that just like a black hole, even light can't escape from Blackbeard's darkness. On the other hand, Teach is extremely vulnerable to any physical attacks, so especially the gravity fruit would seem like a quite capable option of taking him down here, since it's the only fruit where Blackbeard could not make actual contact with Luffy's body to nullify his powers. And if Luffy could actually manage to stop Teach right here, that would of course change a whole lot of things in the actual story. Fantastic. For the war at Marineford, really any of Luffy's new powers would be of much more use than his rubber powers were in the main timeline. And I think that especially Green Bull's forest fruit would absolutely shine here for the very first time ever. After all, it is particularly useful when attacking a large number of weaker enemies, so Luffy can just take out whole squads of marine soldiers at once, absorbing their energy to heal himself. He could also use his roots to sneakily free Ace much faster, giving him a much better chance to actually survive all of this. And as a bonus on top, we do know that the forest fruit is actually not weak to fire, surprisingly, something that Green Bull shows us when Momonosuke tries to set him on fire during Wano. And so overall, Luffy would have a way better chance standing up to Akainu and causing a little bit of trouble for him. However, overall, Luffy would only become a true monster with all these devil fruits after honing his skills with them for 2 years with Rayleigh and combining them with Haki. And so after the time skip, Luffy would once again go through the first 3 enemies with ease. Fishman Island, Caesar on Punk Hazard, and even Doflamingo and Dressrosa would stand not even the slightest chance against any of these 5 Luffys. And not only that, I think Luffy would also have no problem taking out Katakuri, and in case of the Magma Fruit, you could even argue that Luffy would be able to put up a real fight against Big Mom at that point already. He definitely would not have been captured by Big Mom's army, and if he had had the Ice Fruit, fleeing Whole Cake Island would also have been a real piece of cake. So the real question is, of course, what would have happened against Kaido in Wano? Let's say Luffy also awakens his Devil Fruit there once again. Now admittedly, we don't quite know yet what an awakened Logia fruit is truly capable of, but it's very likely that many of the crazy islands in the Grand Line were actually shaped by awakened Logia fruit users in the past. So here's my prediction for each of the 5 fruits. I think that Forest Luffy would once again lose quite terribly. No way that trees and plants would be able to seriously damage Kaido with his wind blades and hardened skin. Luffy with the Magma Fruit could go either way, I think. I mean, Akainu's fruit awakened sounds pretty truly terrifying, but then again, Kaido can fly. Although he did end up in Magma in the end, to be fair. We'll see. Luffy with Kizaru's fruit would have a pretty decent chance to win, I think. I mean, if Luffy advances his armament Haki and conquers Haki as much as in the main storyline, he should be both fast and powerful enough with his light powers to take Kaido out. And similarly, he could use both gravity and ice to keep Kaido out of the air and slowly grind him down over time. The gravity fruit would of course be super useful to bombard Kaido with meteors, but that would also destroy the entire island of Onigashima, so it might actually be a little bit of a drawback here. And in any case, I would argue that after Wano, Luffy's actual Devil Fruit has turned out to be even more powerful than any of these 5 anyways. So maybe the much more interesting question to ask here is not what would have happened if Luffy did all the same stuff but with a different Devil Fruit, but instead what would have happened to the One Piece world if Luffy with his legendary Devil Fruit had been allowed to join Shanks and his crew as a kid. Because that one is a much more crazy timeline than this one. If you're curious, you can watch that one right here. Thanks for watching.